The signal came through the deep space network like a scream in the darkness. Dae-hyun Kim sat in his office at the Galactic Council building on SciFiPrime when the emergency alert flashed across his screen. He had been Earth's ambassador to the galaxy for 3 years now and had never seen anything like this before. The signal was desperate and broken but clear enough to understand. Someone was dying out there in the black void between stars. Minji Park rushed into his office without knocking. She was Earth's military liaison officer, and her face was pale with worry. She carried a datapad that showed readings from the signal. The numbers were bad. Very bad. Minji had served in Earth's Navy for 15 years before taking this posting, and she knew what death looked like when it came from space. "Sir, you need to see this," Minji said as she placed the datapad on his desk. "The signal is coming from the Vega system. It's from the Lumari homeworld. They're under attack." Dae-hyun picked up the pad and read the translation. The words made his stomach turn cold. The Lumari were one of the most peaceful species in the galaxy. They lived in beautiful crystal cities and grew their technology instead of building it. Their ships looked like living things made of light and glass. They had never hurt anyone in their long history among the stars. The message was simple but terrible. "Help us. Please help us. They are killing everyone. The Korthax have come and we cannot stop them. Our cities are burning. Our children are dying. Please, anyone who can hear this, help us." The signal had traveled for 6 days to reach the Galactic Council. That meant the attack had started a week ago. The Lumari might already be dead by now. Dae-hyun stood up and walked to his window. He could see the Great Council building where representatives from hundreds of worlds met to discuss peace and trade. Today they would discuss war. The council chamber was full when Dae-hyun and Minji arrived. Representatives from across the galaxy sat in their special seats designed for their different body types. Some looked like trees with eyes. Others were made of living crystal like the Lumari. A few looked almost human but with extra arms or different colored skin. All of them were talking at once about the signal from Vega. Council Elder Thylos called for order. He was tall and blue with 4 arms and had been leading council meetings for over a century. His voice was calm, but Dae-hyun could hear the worry underneath. "The situation in the Vega system is grave," Thylos said. "We have lost contact with 3 Lumari worlds. The Korthax Empire has broken the peace treaty and invaded neutral space." A representative from the bird-like Telonians stood up. Her feathers were bright red with anger. "The Korthax have done this before. They attacked the Balari colonies last year. They enslaved the survivors and stripped the worlds bare. We cannot let this happen again." Another representative shook his head. He looked like a large bear, but with purple fur and gentle eyes. "Our peacekeeping forces are already stretched thin. The Korthax have ships designed for war. We have ships designed for exploration and trade. How can we fight them?" The debate went on for hours. Some wanted to send a diplomatic message to the Korthax Empire. Others wanted to impose trade sanctions. A few brave voices called for military action, but they were quickly shouted down. The galaxy had been at peace for so long that most species had forgotten how to fight. Dae-hyun listened to it all and felt his anger growing. While they talked and argued, people were dying. The Lumari were gentle beings who had never hurt anyone. They had welcomed every species to their worlds with open arms. They had shared their art and music and knowledge freely. Now they were being murdered while the galaxy held meetings. Finally, Dae-hyun stood up. The chamber grew quiet. Everyone knew that humans were different from the other species. Earth was classified as a death world, a planet so dangerous that only the strongest could survive there. Most aliens feared humans and tried to avoid them. They saw humans as violent and unpredictable. "Honored representatives," Dae-hyun said in his calm, diplomatic voice. "While we debate, the Lumari die. Every hour we delay gives the Korthax more time to complete their genocide. Earth offers to send military assistance to the Vega system immediately." The chamber erupted in noise. Representatives shouted in dozens of different languages. Some were afraid, others were angry. A few seemed relieved that someone was willing to act. Council Elder Thylos raised all 4 of his arms for silence. "Ambassador Kim, Earth's military is..." concerning to many members of this council. Your species has a reputation for violence that makes others uncomfortable. Perhaps a more measured response would be better. Daehyun felt Minji tense beside him. She had served in combat zones across Earth's history. She had seen what humans could do when they were angry. But she had also seen what humans could do when they were protecting others. Before Daehyun could respond, a new voice spoke from the back of the chamber. Everyone turned to see a Lumari walking slowly toward the speaking platform. His crystal skin was cracked and dim. One of his arms was missing and his movements were painful to watch. This was Hyon, the only survivor from the first Korthax attack. Hyun's voice was like wind chimes in a gentle breeze, but there was steel underneath the music. "I have seen my people die," he said. "I have watched Korthax soldiers kill children for sport. I have seen them burn our crystal gardens just to watch the light fade. Your peacekeeping forces are good and kind, but they are not warriors. The Korthax respect only strength and fear, only death." He turned to look directly at Daehyun. "I know what your people are. I know what your world has made you. Every species here fears you because you come from a place of constant danger. But that is exactly what we need now. We need someone who understands violence to stop violence." The chamber was silent now. Even the translation devices seemed to hold their breath. Hyun continued speaking, and his words cut through the air like a blade. "I do not ask you to be our friends. I do not ask you to love us. I ask you only to help us survive. My people are dying while we talk. Please." Council Elder Thylos looked around the chamber. Many representatives were nodding now. The fear was still there, but it was mixed with something else. Hope. Maybe the scary humans could save the gentle Lumari. "The council will take a formal vote," Thylos announced. "All in favor of requesting military assistance from Earth." The vote was close, but it passed. Daehyun felt relief wash over him, but it was mixed with worry. The council had given permission, but he knew there would be conditions and delays. There would be committees and reports and more meetings. By the time they finished talking, the Lumari would be extinct. After the session ended, Hyun approached Daehyun and Minji. Up close, they could see how badly injured he was. His crystal skin was covered in cracks that leaked a blue fluid that might have been blood, but his eyes were bright with desperate hope. "Will you really help us?" Hyun asked. "Or will you talk like the others until there is nothing left to save?" Daehyun looked at the broken Lumari and made a decision that would change the galaxy forever. "Officer Park, send a priority message to Earth Defense Command. Tell them we have a situation that requires immediate military response. Tell them there are people dying who need our help." Minji smiled for the first time that day. "Yes, sir. Should I mention that the Galactic Council has approved this action?" Daehyun thought about all the committees and delays that would come with official approval. He thought about Hyun's people dying while bureaucrats filled out forms. "No," he said. "Tell them this is a humanitarian crisis. Tell them Earth does not abandon those who cry for help." As Minji sent the message across space toward Earth, Daehyun looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there in the darkness, the Korthax were killing innocent people. But help was coming. The Deathworlders were about to go to war. Admiral Taewon Lee was drinking his morning coffee and reading reports when the priority message arrived at Earth Defense Command. The red alert symbols flashed across his screen, and the computer's voice announced an emergency transmission from the Galactic Council. Taewon had been expecting bad news for days now. The reports from the outer systems had been getting worse and worse. He opened the message and read it twice to make sure he understood correctly. The Lumari were under attack. The Galactic Council was asking for help. Ambassador Kim was requesting immediate military response. Taewon set down his coffee cup and activated the emergency command system. Within minutes, his office was full of senior officers. Colonel Jiwon Choi arrived first. She commanded the Korean Aerospace Forces and was one of Earth's best pilots. Her record included combat missions in 3 different star systems, and she had never lost a pilot under her command. Behind her came Marine General Seokmin Nam, a man who had fought in every major conflict of the last 20 years. "What's the situation?" Jiwon asked as she took a seat at the conference table. She was small and quiet, but everyone in the room knew she was deadly in a cockpit. Her flight suit bore the patches of 6 different elite squadrons, and her eyes were always alert for danger. Taewon activated the main display and showed them the message from Ambassador Kim. The room grew quiet as they read about the Korthax attacks on the Lumari worlds. These were experienced officers who had seen war before, but the descriptions of the massacres made them angry. General Seokmin spoke first. His voice was calm, but there was steel underneath it. "How long do we have before the Lumari are completely wiped out?" "Unknown," Taewon replied. "The signal took 6 days to reach the Galactic Council. Ambassador Kim estimates we have maybe 2 weeks before the Korthax finish their campaign. That gives us very little time to organize a response." Communications specialist Eunji burst into the room without knocking. She was Daehyun's younger sister and had been monitoring the galactic communication networks since the crisis began. Her face was pale and her hands were shaking slightly. "Sir, I've been analyzing the Lumari distress signals," she said as she connected her datapad to the main display. "The situation is worse than we thought. The Korthax aren't just conquering these worlds. They're strip mining them completely. They're taking everything valuable and leaving nothing behind." The display showed images from the Lumari homeworld transmitted before the communication networks went down. Beautiful crystal cities lay in ruins. Massive Korthax mining ships were tearing apart the planet's surface. Bodies floated in space around orbital stations that had been destroyed for no strategic reason. Colonel Jiwon stood up and walked to the display. She studied the images of the Korthax ships with a pilot's eye for detail. "These are warships built for intimidation," she said. "Big, slow, and heavily armored. They rely on overwhelming firepower and numbers. They've never fought an enemy that could match their mobility." "What are you thinking?" Admiral Taewon asked. Jiwon smiled, but it was not a pleasant expression. "I'm thinking they've never fought humans before. They don't know what we're capable of when we're angry." General Seokmin was already reviewing deployment options on his tablet. "I can have the 1st Marine Expeditionary Force ready to ship out in 72 hours. That includes the 15th Special Operations Battalion and the Rapid Deployment Engineering Corps. But, sir, we're talking about fighting an entire empire with one task force." "Sometimes one task force is enough," Taewon said, "especially if it's the right task force with the right motivation. The Korthax have been fighting peacekeeping forces and civilian populations. They've never faced soldiers who grew up fighting for survival on a death world." Elite Sergeant Minho entered the room and saluted. He was lean and scarred from years of special operations missions. His unit had been training for deep space combat scenarios, and they were ready for deployment. "Sir, the Special Forces teams are standing by. We've reviewed the intelligence on Korthax ship design. Their vessels have maintenance tunnels that are too small for their soldiers, but perfect for human infiltration." Taewon nodded. This was exactly the kind of thinking that made humans dangerous in combat. While other species fought according to established rules and traditions, humans looked for any advantage they could find. If the Korthax ships had weaknesses, human soldiers would exploit them. "What about the political situation?" General Seokmin asked. "The Galactic Council approved military assistance, but they'll want oversight and reports. They'll want us to follow their rules of engagement." Admiral Taewon walked to the window and looked out at the military ships in orbital dock. Earth had learned long ago that sometimes you had to act first and ask permission later. "The Galactic Council can file their reports after we save the Lumari. Right now, people are dying while bureaucrats hold meetings." Yoonji cleared her throat, nervously. "Sir, there's something else you should know. I've been monitoring Korthax military communications. They're calling this operation Final Harvest. They plan to completely eliminate the Lumari species and claim their worlds for the Empire. This isn't just conquest. It's genocide." The room fell silent. Every officer present had sworn an oath to protect innocent life. The idea of standing by while an entire species was murdered was unthinkable. They had all seen the reports from Earth's history when genocides had been allowed to happen. Never again was not just a slogan. It was a promise. Colonel Jiwon was the first to speak. "Admiral, I request permission to lead the advance force. My pilots can be ready to launch in 6 hours. We can establish air superiority and buy time for the main force to arrive." "Granted," Taewon said immediately. take your best squadrons and the experimental FTL fighters. Show the Korthax what human pilots can do when they're protecting innocent people. General Soakman was already making deployment plans. I'll take the 1st Marines and the Engineering Corps. If there are Lumari survivors, we'll need to establish defensive positions quickly. My people can turn any location into a fortress, given enough time and motivation. Sergeant Minho stepped forward. Sir, request permission to lead infiltration. Operations against Korthax command ships. If we can disrupt their communications and command structure, it will give our main forces a significant advantage. Approved, Taiwan said. Take your best people and make the Korthax commanders regret starting this war. Yunji was working frantically at her datapad. Sir, I'm establishing communication protocols with any surviving Lumari networks. If there are resistance groups still active, we can coordinate our operations with them. I'm also analyzing Korthax tactical communications to identify weaknesses in their strategy. Admiral Taiwan looked around the room at his officers. These were some of Earth's finest military leaders, and they were all eager to help people they had never met against an enemy they had never fought. This was what made humans different from the other species in the galaxy. When innocent people cried for help, humans answered without hesitation. Ladies and gentlemen, Taiwan said in his formal command voice, the Korthax Empire believes they can commit genocide without consequences. They believe the galaxy is too weak and divided to stop them. They are about to learn why Earth is classified as a death world. The deployment began immediately. Across Earth's military bases, soldiers and pilots prepared for combat in deep space. Equipment was loaded onto transport ships, weapons were tested, and ammunition was distributed. Within hours, the orbital dockyards were busy with ships preparing for departure. Colonel Jiwan's fighter squadrons launched first. The experimental FTL fighters were small and fast, designed for hit-and-run attacks against larger ships. Her pilots were young and eager, trained in Earth's most dangerous flight schools. They had grown up hearing stories about their ancestors who had fought impossible odds and won. General Seokman's Marines followed in heavy transport ships loaded with armored vehicles and construction equipment. These were soldiers who had trained in Earth's harshest environments. They had fought in deserts and jungles, in frozen wastelands and burning cities. They knew how to adapt and survive in any conditions. Sergeant Minho's Special Forces teams traveled in stealth ships designed to avoid detection. Their mission was to infiltrate Korthax vessels and cause as much chaos as possible. They carried weapons and explosives designed for close-quarters combat in zero-gravity environments. As the Earth fleet prepared to jump to FTL speed, Admiral Taiwan received a message from the Galactic Council. They were concerned about human military action. They wanted detailed reports and oversight committees. They wanted rules of engagement and diplomatic protocols. Taiwan read the message and deleted it. There would be time for reports and committees after the Lumari were safe. Right now, Earth's Deathworlders were going to war. The Korthax Empire was about to discover why the galaxy feared humans. They were about to learn that sometimes the most dangerous predators make the best protectors. The fleet jumped to FTL speed and disappeared into the darkness between stars. They were racing against time to reach the Vega system before the last Lumari died. Behind them, Earth continued preparing additional forces. If the first wave wasn't enough, there would be a second wave, and a third. Earth would send every ship and every soldier if necessary. The human fleet dropped out of FTL speed at the edge of the Vega system and immediately went to battle stations. Colonel Jiwan's fighter squadrons spread out in attack formation, while the main ships activated their scanning systems. What they found made every human officer angry beyond words. Vega 3, the third planet in the system, was burning. The beautiful crystal cities of the Lumari were shattered ruins that glowed with dying light. Massive Korthax mining ships were stripping the planet's surface, while their warships patrolled the space around it. Bodies of Lumari civilians floated in orbit around destroyed space stations. "Contact," announced the sensor operator on Admiral Taiwan's flagship. Korthax fleet composition includes 12 heavy cruisers, 36 destroyers, and approximately 200 fighter craft. They have mining operations active on the planet's surface. Colonel Jiwan's voice came through the communication system from her fighter. "Admiral, requesting permission to engage. I can see Lumari survivors being loaded onto Korthax slave ships." Admiral Taiwan looked at the tactical display. The human force was outnumbered at least 5-1. In traditional galactic warfare, this would be considered a hopeless situation. But humans had never followed traditional rules when innocent. Lives were at stake. "All units, this is Admiral Lee," Taewon announced on all frequencies. "The Korthax are committing genocide against peaceful civilians. Our mission is to stop them and rescue any survivors. Remember, we are not here as conquerors. We are here as protectors. Engage the enemy." Colonel Ji-won led the first attack with her squadron of experimental fighters. The small, fast ships accelerated toward the Korthax fleet at speeds that would have crushed most alien pilots. Human pilots had trained in high-G maneuvers since they were children, learning to push their bodies beyond normal limits. The Korthax commanders were completely unprepared for human tactics. They expected the small, human force to group together for protection and advance slowly like other galactic militaries. Instead, Ji-won's fighters scattered in all directions and attacked from unexpected angles. Young pilot Sunwoo followed his squadron leader through a series of impossible maneuvers that took them between two massive Korthax destroyers. The alien ships tried to target the human fighters, but they were too slow and predictable. Sunwoo's missiles struck the destroyer's engine section, and the huge ship began to list helplessly. "This is Wolf Leader," Ji-won's voice crackled through the communication system. "Korthax fighters are moving to intercept. They're flying in perfect formation like they're on parade. Someone needs to teach them about real combat." The Korthax fighter pilots had trained for years in formation, flying, and coordinated attacks. They moved like a school of fish, beautiful and synchronized. But when Ji-won's squadron hit them from 6 different directions at once, their perfect formation became a perfect target. Human fighters were designed for individual combat, not formation flying. Each pilot was trained to think independently and adapt quickly to changing situations. When a Korthax formation tried to surround Sunwoo's fighter, he rolled inverted and dove straight down through their formation, firing as he went. General Seokman's Marines were already loading into assault shuttles as the space battle raged around them. Their mission was to reach the planet's surface and rescue Lumari survivors before the Korthax could kill them all. The shuttles were heavily armored and designed to survive atmospheric entry under fire. "1st Marine Battalion, prepare for combat drop," General Seokman announced to his troops. "Intelligence indicates the Korthax have established processing centers where they are separating Lumari civilians. Our job is to shut down those operations and get the survivors to safety." Elite Sergeant Minho's Special Forces team had already launched in stealth shuttles toward the largest Korthax cruiser. Their mission was to infiltrate the ship and disrupt enemy communications. The stealth shuttles were painted black and equipped with systems that made them nearly invisible to alien sensors. The Korthax cruiser was a massive ship designed to intimidate enemies into surrender. It was covered in heavy armor and bristled with weapons. But like most alien warships, it had been designed by engineers who assumed all soldiers were large and strong like the Korthax themselves. Minho and his team found the maintenance tunnels, exactly where human intelligence had predicted they would be. The tunnels were too small for Korthax soldiers, but perfect for humans who had learned to fight in tight spaces. The Special Forces team moved through the ship like ghosts, planting explosives and gathering intelligence. On the planet's surface, the situation was desperate. The beautiful crystal cities of the Lumari had been reduced to rubble, and their surviving population was being herded into processing centers. Korthax soldiers stood guard over thousands of prisoners, while mining equipment tore apart the landscape. General, Seokman's Marines hit the planet like a hammer. Their assault shuttles came down through the atmosphere under heavy fire from Korthax ground defenses. Several shuttles were hit and crashed, but the Marines kept coming. They had trained for combat drops on hostile worlds, and they knew how to survive. The first Marine unit to reach the surface was led by Captain Kyung, a veteran of dozens of combat missions. Her troops immediately moved to establish a defensive perimeter around the largest processing center. The Korthax guards were expecting an organized attack from one direction. Instead, they faced Marines attacking from every direction at once. The Korthax had evolved from herd animals on a peaceful world. They were large and strong, but they fought like animals in a herd, staying together for protection. Human soldiers had evolved from hunters and survivors. They fought like predators, using cover and concealment to get close to their enemies. Captain Kyung's Marines moved through the ruined city like shadows. They used the debris of destroyed buildings for cover and struck at the Korthax guards before disappearing again. The alien soldiers had never faced this kind of warfare before, and they began to panic. Inside the processing center, thousands of Lumari civilians waited in terror for death. They had heard stories about the Korthax treatment of prisoners, and they knew their time was running out. When the first human Marines burst through the walls of their prison, many Lumari thought they were hallucinating. "Don't be afraid," Captain Kyung told the prisoners in the best Lumari she could manage. "We're here to help you. We're going to get you out of here." The Lumari had never seen humans before, but they had heard the stories. Everyone in the galaxy knew about the Deathworlders from Earth. They were supposed to be violent and dangerous, but these humans were sharing their food and medical supplies with injured prisoners. Above the planet, the space battle continued to rage. Colonel Jiwan's fighters had destroyed most of the Korthax fighter squadrons and were now attacking the larger ships. The experimental human fighters were proving to be far superior to anything the Korthax had ever faced. Pilot Sunwoo found himself pursuing a damaged Korthax destroyer that was trying to escape the battle. The alien ship was larger and more heavily armed, but it was also slow and predictable. Sunwoo waited until the destroyer tried to turn away and then hit it with everything he had. The destroyer's shields collapsed, and secondary explosions began to tear through its hull. Sunwoo expected the ship to explode, but instead he received a surrender signal. The Korthax crew was giving up rather than fight to the death. "Colonel, this is Wolf 7, Sunwoo reported. "The destroyer is surrendering. What are my orders?" Jiwan's voice came back immediately. "Accept their surrender and escort them to a safe distance. We don't kill enemies who give up, even if they are murdering scum." This confused the Korthax commanders completely. They had expected the humans to destroy, surrendering ships and execute prisoners. That was what the Korthax themselves would have done. Instead, the humans were taking prisoners and treating them according to galactic law. Sergeant Minho's Special Forces team had reached the bridge of the Korthax cruiser. The alien officers were huge and intimidating, but they had never faced human soldiers in close combat. When Minho's team burst through the bridge doors, the Korthax officers reached for their weapons. The firefight lasted less than 30 seconds. Human soldiers were faster and more accurate than the Korthax had expected. When the shooting stopped, half the alien officers were dead, and the rest were wounded. Minho immediately called for medical assistance for the wounded enemies. "This is Alpha Team," Minho reported to Admiral Taewan. "Enemy command ship is secured. We have prisoners and intelligence data. The Korthax were not expecting resistance, and their plans are completely disrupted." Admiral Taewan smiled grimly as reports came in from all across the battle zone. Human forces were winning despite being outnumbered because they fought differently than any enemy the Korthax had ever faced. The aliens had expected a conventional battle with predictable tactics. Instead, they got humans. The tide of battle turned completely when the Korthax realized they were not fighting conquerors like themselves. These humans were risking their lives to save people they had never met. Human medics were treating wounded Korthax soldiers. Human engineers were already working to restore power to damaged Lumari facilities. Commander Vex Har, the Korthax officer in charge of the planetary operation, watched his forces collapse in confusion. The news of humanity's victory reached the Korthax Empire 3 days later and sent shockwaves through their high command. Warprime Dakmor could not believe the reports from Commander Vex Har's shattered fleet. A small human force had defeated 12 heavy cruisers and hundreds of fighters. It was impossible, but the evidence was undeniable. Dakmor stood in the war room of the Imperial flagship, studying holographic displays that showed the disaster at Vega 3. He was the supreme military commander of the Korthax Empire, a veteran of 50 conquest campaigns. He had never lost a battle in his 40 years of service. The humans had just handed him his first defeat. "How many humans were involved in this attack?" Dakmor asked his intelligence officers. "Approximately 5,000 soldiers and 300 spacecraft," came the reply. They were outnumbered 10 to 1 but achieved complete tactical victory. Within 18 hours, Dakmor's massive fists clenched in anger. The Korthax were proud warriors who had built their empire through strength and fear. No species had ever defeated them so completely with such a small force. These humans were making the Empire look weak in front of the entire galaxy. "Prepare the war fleets," Dakmor ordered. I want every available ship ready for deployment to the Vega system. We will crush these humans and finish what we started with the Lumari. Meanwhile, in the Vega system, Admiral Taewon Lee was preparing for exactly this response. He knew the Korthax would not accept defeat easily. They would return in greater numbers with better weapons and a desire for revenge. The human force needed to be ready for a much larger battle. Colonel Jiwon Choi had been promoted to lead all human fighter operations in the system. Her small squadrons had proven incredibly effective against Korthax tactics, but she knew they would face much stiffer resistance next time. She was working with her pilots to develop new strategies for fighting larger enemy forces. The Korthax learn fast, Jiwon told her squadron leaders during a briefing. They'll adapt their formations and tactics based on what happened in the first battle. We need to stay ahead of them and keep changing our approach. Young pilot Sunwoo had become something of a hero among the Lumari survivors. He had personally rescued dozens of civilians during the battle, and his fighter bore the scorch marks of multiple enemy hits. But he was troubled by intelligence reports about Korthax, reinforcements heading their way. "Colonel, the numbers don't look good," Sunwoo said after reviewing the latest reports. "Intelligence estimates they're sending at least 100 ships this time. How are we supposed to fight that many enemies?" Jiwon smiled, but there was no humor in it. "The same way humans have always fought impossible odds. We adapt, we improvise, and we never give up. The Lumari are counting on us to protect them." General Seokmin Nam was having similar concerns about the ground situation. His Marines had established defensive positions around the major Lumari population centers, but they were spread thin across multiple continents. When the Korthax returned, they would face massive landing forces. Brilliant tactical officer Borum had joined Admiral Taewon's staff as an aide and intelligence analyst. She had studied every aspect of Korthax military doctrine and was working on plans to counter their expected tactics. Her analysis was both hopeful and frightening. "The good news is that Korthax forces are predictable," Borum explained to the senior staff. "They rely on overwhelming force and intimidation. The bad news is that they're bringing enough ships to overwhelm us through sheer numbers." Engineering Corps leader Kyung had been working non-stop since the first battle to strengthen human defensive positions. Her teams were using a combination of human technology and Lumari crystal engineering to create hybrid defensive systems that neither species could have built alone. "We're turning every moon and asteroid in this system into a weapons platform," Kyung reported. "The Lumari crystal technology can store and focus energy in ways our weapons never could. Combined with human targeting systems, we'll have defensive capabilities the Korthax won't expect." The work was exhausting, but the humans pushed themselves beyond normal limits. They knew that millions of Lumari lives depended on their success. The crystal cities were being rebuilt with defensive capabilities, while the surviving population helped however they could. Lumari survivor Hyun had become the unofficial liaison between his people and the human forces. He was amazed by how quickly the humans had learned to work with Lumari technology and how they included Lumari engineers in their planning sessions. "Your people are different from what we expected," Hyun told Admiral Taewon during one of their meetings. "The galaxy fears humans because you come from a dangerous world, but you use that danger to protect others, not to conquer them." Taewon nodded thoughtfully. "Earth taught us that survival requires strength, but survival alone is not enough. We learned that protecting others gives survival meaning. That's why we're here." The Galactic Council finally sent their own peacekeeping force to the Vega system, led by Commander Thylos. But when they arrived, they found that the humans had already transformed the entire system into a fortress. Asteroid fields had been converted into weapons platforms, and every habitable moon housed defensive installations. "This is remarkable," Commander Thylos admitted to Admiral Taewon. "My engineering teams estimate this construction should have taken months, but you completed it in weeks. How is this possible?" "Human engineering crews are used to working under pressure," Taewon replied. "When people are in danger, we don't have time for normal construction schedules. We build what we need with whatever materials are available." The Galactic Council ships were welcomed by the human force, but their commanders were shocked by what they saw. Human soldiers shared their rations with Lumari civilians while working 18-hour shifts to strengthen defenses. Human medics treated injured Korthax prisoners with the same care they gave to their own wounded. "I have never seen anything like this," Commander Thylos confided to his staff. These humans fight like demons but act like angels. No wonder the galaxy doesn't know what to make of them. Elite Sergeant Minho had spent the time between battles training Lumari volunteers in basic combat techniques. The crystal beings were not natural warriors, but they were intelligent and motivated. With human weapons and training, they could defend their own cities. The Lumari learn quickly, Minho reported to General Syokmin. They'll never be assault troops, but they can hold defensive positions and operate our equipment. That frees up our Marines for offensive operations. Communications. Specialist Yunji had been monitoring Korthak's military transmissions, and her reports were increasingly alarming. The Empire was sending not just ships, but their most elite units. War Prime Dakamor himself was leading the attack with forces that had conquered entire star systems. The intelligence is clear, Yunji told the command staff. This will be the largest Korthak's military operation in 50 years. They're bringing everything they have to crush us and make an example for the rest of the galaxy. Admiral Taewon studied the tactical projections and knew the coming battle would test human resolve like never before. They were still outnumbered, but now they faced the best troops the Korthak's empire could field. Victory was possible, but it would come at a terrible cost. All department heads, prepare your final reports, Taewon ordered. I want to know exactly what we have available for the coming battle. Every ship, every weapon, every soldier. We're going to need everything. As the reports came in, the numbers were sobering. The human force had grown with reinforcements from Earth, but they still faced odds of nearly 20-1. In any conventional battle, these odds would mean certain defeat. But humans had never been conventional warriors. The Korthak's war fleets dropped out of FTL speed at the edge of the system like a storm front moving across the galaxy. Hundreds of ships spread out in perfect formation, their hulls gleaming with weapons and armor. War Prime Dakamor had brought enough firepower to reduce planets to ash. All human forces, this is Admiral Lee, Taewon announced on all frequencies. The enemy has arrived in force. Remember why we're here. Remember who we're protecting. Today, we show the galaxy what humans can do when innocent people need our help. Colonel Jiwon's expanded fighter wings launched from hidden bases on asteroids and moons throughout the system. They had been practicing new tactics for weeks and were ready to face whatever the Korthaks brought against them. The pilots were young and scared, but they were also determined. All wings, this is Wolf Leader. Jiwon's voice came through the communication system. The Korthaks think they can intimidate us with numbers. Let's show them why Earth breeds the best pilots in the galaxy. Attack pattern Delta, execute. The space around Vega 3 erupted in light and fire as the largest battle in galactic history began. Human fighters swarmed around massive Korthaks battleships like insects attacking giants. But these insects had stingers that could kill, and they knew exactly where to strike. The storm had been unleashed, and only one side would survive it. War Prime Dakamor commanded the Korthaks assault from his massive flagship, watching as his war fleets advanced toward the human positions. He expected the small human force to retreat or surrender when faced with such overwhelming numbers. Instead, the humans attacked immediately with a ferocity that shocked even veteran Korthaks warriors. Colonel Jiwon's fighter squadrons hit the advancing Korthaks fleet from every direction at once. Her pilots had spent weeks studying the enemy formations, and they knew exactly where to strike. The experimental human fighters moved like deadly dancers through space, too fast and agile for the heavy Korthaks weapons to target effectively. Young pilot Sunwoo led his squadron in a desperate attack against a Korthaks battleship 10 times the size of his fighter. The massive alien vessel bristled with weapons, but Sunwoo had learned that size was not always an advantage. He dove beneath the battleship's firing arc and struck at its engine sections with precisely aimed missiles. This is Wolf 7, Sunwoo reported as secondary explosions rippled through the enemy ship. Direct hit on the battleship's main drive. She's losing power and falling out of formation. Admiral Taewon coordinated the human defense from his command ship, watching as his forces executed plans they had rehearsed hundreds of times. The Korthaks had more ships and more weapons, but they were fighting according to predictable patterns. Humans excelled at finding patterns and breaking them. All defensive platforms, commence firing, Taewon ordered. The asteroid forts and moon, bases that Engineer Kyung's teams had built, opened fire with weapons that combined human targeting systems with Lumari crystal technology. The hybrid weapons proved devastatingly effective against Korthak's shields. General Siakman's Marines prepared for the inevitable ground assault as Korthak's landing ships broke through the orbital battle. His troops had turned every Lumari city into a fortress and trained the crystal beings to fight alongside human soldiers. When the alien invaders landed, they found an enemy that refused to break. Elite Sergeant Minho led his special forces teams in another infiltration mission, this time targeting HFY Dakamor's flagship itself. The massive Korthak's command ship was heavily defended, but it still had the same design flaws that all alien vessels shared. Maintenance tunnels too small for Korthak's soldiers were perfect highways for human infiltrators. The battle raged across the entire Vega system as human forces fought with desperate courage against impossible odds. Communications specialist Yunji coordinated between different units, while tactical analyst Borum fed real-time intelligence to field commanders. Every human played a vital role in the defense. HFY Dakamor grew increasingly frustrated as his perfect battle plans fell apart. The humans fought like no enemy he had ever faced. They used terrain and technology in ways that seemed impossible. Worst of all, they never retreated even when facing certain death. How can such a small force resist our entire war fleet? Dakamor demanded of his staff officers. They should have surrendered hours ago when they realized they could not win. His intelligence officer, a scarred veteran of many campaigns, studied the tactical displays with growing unease. HFY, I believe these humans are not fighting to win. They are fighting to protect the Lumari civilians. They will die before they retreat. This concept was alien to Korthak's thinking. They fought for conquest and glory, not for the protection of other species. The idea that soldiers would sacrifice themselves for strangers was beyond their understanding. But as the battle continued, the evidence became undeniable. Human pilots crashed their damaged fighters into Korthak's ships rather than abandon their positions. Marine units held impossible positions against overwhelming odds to protect Lumari evacuation sites. Even when facing certain death, human soldiers continued fighting to buy time for civilians to escape. Lumari survivor Hyun watched the battle from a shelter deep beneath his planet's surface. Around him, thousands of his people waited in terror. As explosions shook the ground above, the humans had promised to protect them, but how could so few stand against so many? The humans are still fighting, reported a Lumari technician monitoring the communication networks. Their pilots are requesting ammunition resupply even though their bases are under heavy attack. They have not asked for evacuation routes. Hyun felt something he had not experienced since the first Korthak's attack began. Hope. These strange beings from the death world called Earth were keeping their promise. They were dying to protect people they had never met before this crisis began. Above the planet, Colonel Jiwon's fighter wings were taking heavy casualties, but they continued their attacks against the Korthak's fleet. Her experimental fighters were running low on fuel and ammunition, but the pilots pressed their attacks with increasing desperation. They knew that every enemy ship they destroyed meant fewer weapons firing at the planet below. All fighters. This is Wolf Leader, Jiwon announced on the squadron frequency. We're making a difference down there. Keep hitting them hard and don't give them time to organize their formations. Make every shot count. Pilot Sunwoo's fighter had been hit multiple times and his engines were failing, but he refused to retreat. He lined up for another attack run against a Korthak's cruiser that was bombarding Marine positions on the planet's surface. His weapons were almost empty, but he had one missile left. The cruiser's defensive guns tracked towards Sunwoo's damaged fighter as he approached on his final attack run. He knew he would not survive this attack, but the Marine unit below was counting on him to silence those guns. Sunwoo armed his last missile and dove straight toward the enemy ship. The missile struck the cruiser's main weapon turret and exploded in a ball of fire that could be seen from the planet's surface. Sunwoo's fighter disappeared in the blast, but the bombardment of the Marine position stopped. Another human pilot had traded his life to protect others. General Siakman's Marines were holding their defensive positions, but the cost was terrible. Korthak's ground forces outnumbered them 50-1 and fought with brutal efficiency. But human soldiers had advantages that numbers could not overcome. They knew the terrain, they had prepared defensive positions, and they were fighting for something greater than themselves. Hold the line, Siakman ordered his troops as another wave of Korthak's attackers advanced on their positions. Every minute we buy gives more civilians time to reach the evacuation sites. Make them pay for every meter. The Marines fought with weapons they had captured from the enemy and improvised explosives made from mining equipment. When their ammunition ran low, they fought with knives and bare hands. Human soldiers had learned to be resourceful because their home world demanded adaptability for survival. Sergeant Minho's infiltration team had reached the bridge of HFY Dakmor's flagship after fighting through dozens of Korthak's security troops. The alien soldiers were larger and stronger than humans, but they had never faced opponents who fought with such tactical intelligence and ruthless efficiency. Bridge secured, Minho reported as his team took control of the Korthak's command center. We have access to their tactical networks and communication systems, beginning disruption of enemy coordination now. The Special Forces team began systematically destroying the Korthak's command and control systems. Without central coordination, the massive alien fleet began to lose its tactical advantage. Individual ships found themselves isolated and vulnerable to human attack. HFY Dakmor himself was captured when Minho's team stormed the command deck. The Supreme Korthak's commander expected to be executed immediately, as was the custom in alien warfare. Instead, he found himself receiving medical treatment for his wounds from human medics, who seemed genuinely concerned about his injuries. "Why? Do you heal your enemies?" Dakmor asked the human medic, who was treating a gash on his arm. "I came here to destroy your people and conquer this system. You should kill me." The medic, a young woman named Sora, looked up from her work with tired eyes. "Because you're wounded and need help. It doesn't matter what you came here to do. What matters is that you're hurt, and we can fix that." This simple act of mercy broke something inside Dakmor's understanding of warfare. He had conquered dozens of worlds and never shown mercy to defeated enemies. The humans were treating him with more kindness than he had ever shown to anyone. The turning point in the battle came when the surviving Korthak's commanders realized they were not fighting conquerors, like themselves. Human forces took prisoners when enemies surrendered. Human medics treated wounded aliens alongside their own casualties. Human engineers were already working to restore power and water to damaged civilian areas. Commander Vexhar, who had survived the first battle, sent a message to his remaining ships. "All units, cease fire and prepare to withdraw. These humans are not our enemies. They are protectors." The Korthak's retreat began slowly at first, then accelerated as more commanders realized the truth. They had come to fight other conquerors but found themselves facing guardians instead. Ship after ship broke off from the attack and withdrew to safe distances. HFY Dakmor watched the battle end from the human medical bay where he was recovering from his injuries. Through the observation windows, he could see human ships moving to assist damaged Korthak's vessels rather than destroying them. It was unlike anything he had ever seen in 40 years of warfare.